So we bought this used Softub, and it is in pretty good condition, but when we started it up, it had a leak, so then I stopped the motor, and after, it had run for like 18 hours, and it ran just fine, no problems, was warming up the water, but once I stopped the motor, it wouldn't start again. And so right here, you can see that I just turned it down, and that's what stopped the motor, because I knew I had a leak, so I didn't need to keep heating the water. But when I went to turn it back on, it just makes a humming noise, and it does not start up. So it'll actually pop the circuit breaker if you just let it sit there and hum. So it's now off, it's disconnected, it's unplugged, and I want to show you what I'm going to do to keep it from humming. We have to replace the capacitor, the starter capacitor. So the first thing that I did to get this off is I disconnected this hose, and I found that just a regular like wine cork will actually plug this hole really nicely. It doesn't have any tape, it doesn't have any glue, it's not even leaking. I just stuck a wine cork in there. And I'm not going to disconnect all of this because I've got water in the tub and I don't want to drain it. It's brand new water, I don't want to drain it. You can see that when I got this tub, it had been, some of the wires had been gnawed down by rodents. Here and then here, those I've already fixed. But the capacitor, the start capacitor, is down in this, and I can't really get to it, right, without pulling this off. But it turns out that everything is actually flexible enough that if by finagling, I can push this up and kind of wiggle this foam piece out. And it stays attached because it's got the power cord. And then I just have a block that I'm just going to set the motor on. So I'm going to take this whole back piece off. And this is, as you can see, one of the really old ones. You can tell it's got this front discharge over here. This is the Vico motor. It's an Ultrajet. And it took me a long time to figure that out because this is all so worn down that you can't even really read it. But it turns out that it doesn't really matter because once I pull this off, you'll see the capacitor, and I just ordered a new capacitor on Amazon. So I have kind of 3 sets of tools that I used to do this project. The first is to pull everything apart. You have to undo the air valve, which lets a lot of water out. So use a 5/16 inch driver to loosen up the pipe clamp. And this is just a regular wine cork stopper that stopped up. And I don't know, yours might be a different size, but that worked perfectly for mine. I didn't have to do anything, no taping. I just stuck that stopper and it stopped the water from flowing. Then once everything was apart, this is the system I used to check that it would pull start, thereby knowing that it's the starter capacitor is the problem. So I have a washer tied to a string, drop that washer down next to the prop shaft, use this magnet to pull the washer back up the other side, and then it's tied to this larger rope. This rope is what I actually use to do the pull start. And then once everything's apart, I've got some insulated needle nose pliers to take the capacitor wires off, just in case the capacitor has a charge in it still. I've got here, this is a 1/4 inch driver. You can also just use a 1/4 inch wrench, and flat bladed screwdriver and hammer. Either of those, you can use whatever you want, but that's just to get the cap off the back of the motor. So I've dropped that washer down, and then I've used a magnet to grab that washer back up, and now you can see that my string here, which I've actually attached also to a nicer rope, is wrapped around that shaft, and if I pull it, I actually can feel that my shaft turns really easily. There's the the impeller is definitely not jammed. So with this in mind, I actually turned it on and it starts humming, and then you turn it counterclockwise if you're sitting in the tub. Like if you were actually sitting in the tub, you want to turn this shaft counterclockwise and it'll start right up. So I know that because it starts right up, it's the starter capacitor is going to be the problem here. Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate that. I'm going to actually turn on the motor, and then he's going to drop this hand. This string is going to go down. This string is going to pull up, and you'll hear it just start right up. All right, so I'm just reaching over here. It's going to hum, and he's going to go. See? There we go. And then he gets the string out of the way, obviously carefully, because that shaft is now turning. You can hear it running. All right, so we're going to start by taking off this cap. The capacitor is actually in there. And down here, that's where that 1/4 inch drive, we're going to take that off, and then we're just going to pop this whole thing off. And you can see here is the capacitor. So again, using that 1/4 drive, I'm just going to take that right off there. I also looked at all of the other wires in here, and they're all really flexible. All the connections are really good. Nothing looks burned up. Obviously, that's the kind of the first thing to check. Make sure that it's not some sort of wiring issue. Once you've figured out that all the wires are really good, then you can assume that it's a capacitor. Now, this is what I ended up ordering, the 233 to 280 MFD, and depending on your voltage, mine was 110. Make sure you get that correct. And so here's my new one. I just ordered it off of Amazon. Again, it's that 233 to 280 and 110 there. And it's actually, you know, exactly the same size, shape, even has the same shape on the bottom, ready to go. Now, if your capacitor was good, it would be holding a charge. So I'm wearing insulated gloves, and I'm using an insulated pair of needle nose to pull these off, because it can hold a charge and it can shock you. I have zero idea how much that shock would hurt, or how much it would shock you if it did, so I just don't. So then just make sure that you put the wires back on how they came off. It fits really nicely right in there, and then we'll put that back. The reassembly is just like the disassembly, and next I'll show you it starting up. Before I put the cap back on, I'm just going to test it and make sure that this actually does work. So I've plugged it back in, and I'm going to turn this on. There it goes. And everything is back together. I've got the insulation on there. My motor's good. It's plugged back in. And there it goes. Turned right on. Yay! Heating back up.